The stranger rode into Murphy's, California, on a Tuesday afternoon in August 1878, dust clinging to his worn leather chaps, and the brim of his hat pulled low against the relentless sun. And Penelope Reynolds knew the moment she saw him through the general store window that her carefully ordered life was about to change forever. She had been arranging bolts of calico fabric when the sound of hoofbeats made her glance up, her hands stilling on the cheerful yellow print she had been admiring. The rider sat tall in his saddle, moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on solid ground. Even from a distance, she could see the way his shoulders carried a weight that had nothing to do with the dust-caked saddlebags slung across his mount's hindquarters. Penelope pressed her palm against the sun-warmed glass, watching as he dismounted outside the Silver Dollar Saloon across the street. He moved like water, fluid and purposeful, tying his horse's reins to the hitching post with practiced efficiency. When he straightened and turned slightly, she caught a glimpse of his profile. Strong jaw, straight nose, and something about the set of his mouth that spoke of hardship and determination in equal measure. "Penelope, dear, those fabrics will not arrange themselves through sheer force of staring." Her employer, Mrs. Harriet Chen, bustled past with an armload of mason jars, her practical skirt swishing against the wooden floorboards. "And for heaven's sake, stop gawking at strange men. What would your mother say?" Penelope felt heat flood her cheeks that had nothing to do with the August temperature. "I was not gawking. I was merely observing a new arrival. You know how rare that is these days." It was true enough. Murphy's had been a bustling gold mining town in the 50s and 60s. But by 1878, most of the easy gold had been claimed, and the population had dwindled to a few hundred stubborn souls who either owned businesses, worked the remaining mining operations, or simply had nowhere else to go. New faces were uncommon, and this particular face had captured her attention in a way that left her unsettled and intrigued in equal measure. Mrs. Chen made a knowing sound in her throat, but said nothing more, disappearing into the stockroom with her jars. Penelope forced herself to turn back to the fabric, but her fingers fumbled with the measurements, and she had to start over twice before getting it right. She was 22 years old and had lived in Murphy's her entire life. Her father had been a mining engineer who had moved the family west from Boston in 1859, chasing dreams of California gold. He had found enough of it to establish a comfortable life before a cave-in at the Union Mine had claimed him when Penelope was 15. Her mother had passed 2 years later from pneumonia, leaving Penelope alone except for an aunt in San Francisco, who occasionally sent letters filled with well-meaning advice and no actual offers of assistance. Working at Chen's general store had given her purpose and independence. Mrs. Chen and her husband Thomas had immigrated from Guangdong Province in 1852 and had weathered the prejudice and violence that too often met Chinese residents in California mining towns. They had built their business through sheer determination and fair dealing, and they treated Penelope like the daughter they had never had. It was a good life, if a quiet one. Penelope had long since accepted that romance was not likely in her future. The young men of Murphy's were either already married, interested in seeking fortunes elsewhere, or simply not interested in her. She had received one proposal from Walter Grimsby, the banker's son, but he had made it clear he wanted a wife to manage his household while he pursued his own interests, which apparently included spending considerable time with the women who worked above the Silver Dollar Saloon. She had declined, and he had married Martha Ann Wilson 3 months later. They seemed content enough with the arrangement, but sometimes, in the quiet hours before sleep claimed her in her small room above the store, Penelope allowed herself to imagine something different, someone different. A man who looked at her and saw not just a shopkeeper or a potential housekeeper, but something more. Someone who made her heart race and her thoughts scatter like leaves in the wind. Someone like the stranger currently pushing through the saloon's swinging doors. She shook her head firmly, braided her auburn hair back more tightly, and returned to her work with renewed determination. Foolishness, that is what this was. Pure foolishness. The afternoon passed in its usual rhythm. Miners came in for tobacco and coffee. Mrs. Patterson needed thread for mending. Young Billy Henderson bought peppermints with pennies he had earned helping at the livery stable. Penelope measured, wrapped, tallied accounts, and tried very hard not to glance out the window to see if the stranger's horse was still tied across the street. It was nearly closing time when the bell above the door chimed, and she looked up from sweeping the floor to find herself face to face with him. Up close, he was even more striking than she had realized. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with dark hair that curled slightly where it brushed his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. His face was weathered by sun and wind, lean and angular, with a day's growth of beard shadowing his jaw. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that suggested he was accustomed to handling whatever trouble came his way. "Good evening," she managed, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "How may I help you?" He removed his hat, revealing more of those dark curls, and nodded politely. "Evening, miss. I am looking for provisions, trail supplies mostly, jerky, hardtack, coffee if you have it, and ammunition for a Winchester." His voice was deep and resonant, with a slight drawl that suggested origin somewhere south of California. Penelope leaned the broom against the counter and moved to gather the requested items, grateful for something to do with her hands. "You are traveling through?" she asked, keeping her tone professionally pleasant as she reached for the shelf of preserved meats. "Was planning to," he said slowly, and something in his tone made her pause. "Though I am reconsidering." She turned to look at him, a package of jerky in each hand. "Murphy's is not much of a destination these days. The gold rush is long over." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his serious features into something that made her breath catch. "I was not exactly chasing gold, miss, more like running from trouble. But this town seems peaceful enough. Figured I might rest here a spell." Penelope should have left it at that. Should have simply nodded, finished gathering his supplies, taken his money, and sent him on his way. Instead, she heard herself ask, "What kind of trouble?" His smile faded, replaced by something more guarded. "The kind that follows a man who made choices he is not particularly proud of. Nothing illegal, I want to be clear on that. Just decisions that put me at odds with folks who do not like being stood up to." She studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against the honest directness in his eyes. Whatever trouble he spoke of, she did not sense danger from him. At least, not the kind that threatened her person. Her peace of mind, on the other hand, was already thoroughly disrupted. "Well," she said finally, setting the jerky on the counter and reaching for the coffee tin, "Murphy's might suit you then. We are small enough that strangers stand out, but most folks here mind their own business. If you are looking for honest work, the mines are always hiring, though the pay is not what it once was. I appreciate the information." He watched her measure out the coffee with careful attention, and she was suddenly very aware of how her simple calico dress hugged her figure, how loose strands of her hair had escaped their pins during the day's work. "And your name, if you do not mind my asking?" "Penelope Reynolds," she said, surprised by her own boldness in offering her Christian name rather than the more proper Miss Reynolds. "I work here at the store." "Jackson Fuller," he replied, extending his hand across the counter. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Reynolds." His hand was warm and calloused, larger than hers, and the brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through her arm. She withdrew quickly, busying herself with wrapping his purchases in brown paper. "The ammunition is in the back," she said. "What caliber do you need?" "44-40, he said. "2 boxes if you have them." She nodded and disappeared into the stockroom, taking the opportunity to press her hands against her flushed cheeks. This was absurd. She was a grown woman of 22, not some silly girl prone to swooning over every handsome face that came through town. She had better control than this. But when she returned with the ammunition boxes and found him examining a display of hand tools with genuine interest, her heart did that peculiar fluttering thing again. "That will be $4.30, she said, tallying the purchases in her mind. He counted out the money without complaint, his movements deliberate and careful. When he handed her the coins, their fingers brushed again, and this time she was certain it was not accidental. "Thank you kindly, Miss Reynolds," he said, gathering his packages. "I expect I will be seeing you around town." "I expect so," she managed. "The store is open every day except Sunday." He settled his hat back on his head, tipped it in farewell, and turned toward the door. Penelope watched him go, her heart still doing that irregular rhythm that felt both alarming and exhilarating. "That one is trouble," Mrs. Chen said from the stockroom doorway, making Penelope jump. "You startled me," Penelope said, pressing a hand to her chest. Mrs. Chen's dark eyes were knowing. "He is handsome, yes, but he carries the kind of weight that pulls others down with him. Be careful, daughter of my heart." Penelope wanted to protest that she had no intention of pursuing anything with Jackson Fuller, that he was simply a customer and nothing more. But the words stuck in her throat, because already she knew they would be a lie. That night, lying in her narrow bed with moonlight painting silver squares on the floor, Penelope could not stop thinking about coffee-colored eyes and a smile that seemed to carry both sorrow and hope. She told herself it meant nothing, that he would likely move on in a few days, and she would forget him as easily as she forgot all the other travelers who passed through Murphy's. But deep down, in a place she rarely acknowledged, she knew this was different. Jackson Fuller had walked into her life like a summer storm rolling over the Sierra Nevada, and nothing was going to be quite the same again. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the August sun promising another scorching day. Penelope dressed carefully, choosing a pale green calico that her mother had always said brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, then felt foolish for the choice, and nearly changed before Mrs. Chen called up the stairs that breakfast was ready. She found Thomas Chen already at the table, reading a week-old newspaper from San Francisco, while Mrs. Chen ladled out congee from the pot on the stove. They lived in the apartment behind and above the store, a comfortable space that smelled of sandalwood and the herbs Mrs. Chen grew in window boxes. "There is talk in town about the new man," Thomas said without looking up from his paper. "He took a room at the boarding house, paid Mrs. Sullivan for a full month in advance." Penelope's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "A full month. I thought he was just passing through." "Apparently he changed his mind," Mrs. Chen said, her tone carefully neutral. "Sarah Sullivan says he was very polite, very proper, asked about work opportunities." Thomas folded his paper and met Penelope's eyes. His face was lined with years of hard work and harder prejudice, but his gaze was kind. "He asked about you." Penelope's heart leaped. "What did he ask? If you were spoken for, if you had family, your circumstances?" Thomas's expression grew more serious. "I told him you were under our protection, that anyone who wished to know you better would need to prove himself worthy of such an honor." Warmth flooded through Penelope, not just from embarrassment but from genuine affection for these people who had become her family. "Thank you," she said softly. Though I am certain he was merely being polite, making conversation. Mrs. Chen made that knowing sound again but said nothing, serving tea with practiced grace. Penelope tried to focus on her breakfast, but her mind kept wandering to the boarding house 3 streets over, wondering what Jackson Fuller was doing at this moment, whether he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. The morning was busy at the store. Word had spread that a new shipment had arrived from Sacramento, and half the town seemed to stop by to see what goods were available. Penelope measured fabric, weighed flour, and counted coins until her fingers were dusty with the powder that clung to everything. It was nearly noon when Jackson Fuller walked through the door for the second time. He looked different in daylight, cleaner somehow, though his clothes were still the practical wear of a man accustomed to life on the trail. He had shaved, revealing the strong lines of his jaw more clearly, and his dark hair was slightly damp, suggesting a recent visit to the bathhouse. "Miss Reynolds," he said, his hat already in his hands. "I hope I am not disturbing your work." "Not at all," she said, conscious of Mrs. Chen's presence somewhere in the back, undoubtedly listening to every word. "Do you need additional supplies?" "Actually, I was hoping you might direct me to the mining office. I am told they are hiring experienced workers, and I would like to inquire about a position." Penelope set down the bolt of gingham she had been holding. "You have mining experience, some," he said. "I worked silver claims in Nevada for a spell. Nothing that made me rich, but I learned the trade well enough." She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "The Union Mine office is down Main Street, past the church. Mr. Kowalski is the foreman. He is fair but demanding. If you tell him you are willing to work hard and follow safety procedures, he will likely give you a chance." "I appreciate that." Jackson shifted his weight slightly, and Penelope realized he was nervous. The thought that she might make this confident, capable-looking man nervous sent a small thrill through her. "I was also wondering, if it is not too forward, whether you might be willing to join me for supper sometime. There is a restaurant, I am told. Nothing fancy but respectable." Her breath caught. Mrs. Patterson was examining buttons near the front window, and Penelope could feel the older woman's attention sharpen despite her apparent focus on the display. Penelope began, then stopped. What did she want to say? Yes, absolutely, she would love to have supper with him. That she had thought of little else since he walked into the store yesterday. That was far too forward. "I think that would be very nice," she managed, "but I should mention that Mr. and Mrs. Chen are very protective of me. They would expect to be introduced properly." Jackson's smile returned, warm and genuine. "I would expect nothing less. When would be convenient? We close the store at 6. Perhaps you could come by then. We usually have supper around 7. "I will be here," he promised. "Thank you, Miss Reynolds." He left with directions to the mine office, and Penelope stood frozen behind the counter, only peripherally aware that Mrs. Patterson had abandoned all pretense of examining buttons and was staring at her openly. "Well, Mrs. Patterson said, her round face lit with barely suppressed excitement. "That was certainly forward of him, though I must say he seems quite taken with you, dear. Are you going to accept?" Before Penelope could answer, Mrs. Chen emerged from the stockroom with perfect timing. "That is a matter for Penelope to decide," she said firmly but not unkindly. "Mrs. Patterson, did you find the buttons you needed?" The older woman took the hint, making her purchases quickly and hurrying out, no doubt to spread the news that Penelope Reynolds was being courted by the mysterious stranger. By supper time, the entire town would know. "You are truly interested in this man?" Mrs. Chen asked once they were alone. Penelope sank onto the stool behind the counter, suddenly feeling unsteady. "I do not know him at all, but yes, I want to know him. Is that foolish?" perhaps, Mrs. Chen said. Or perhaps it is the beginning of something good. We will see what kind of man he proves to be when Thomas questions him tonight. Oh God, Penelope breathed. Thomas is going to question him, is he not? Mrs. Chen's smile was small but genuine. Of course, that is what fathers do. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Penelope's mind wandered constantly, imagining the evening ahead, wondering what she should wear, what Jackson would say, how Thomas would interrogate him. She dropped a jar of pickles, fortunately without breaking it, and had to recount Mrs. Henderson's change 3 times before getting it right. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, she was wound tight with nervous anticipation. She helped Mrs. Chen close up the store, counting the till with fumbling fingers, then rushed upstairs to change out of her work dress. She chose a simple dark blue calico with white collar and cuffs, one of her nicest everyday dresses. Her hair she unpinned and rebraided, coiling it neatly at the nape of her neck. A touch of rose oil at her wrists and throat, a gift from her mother years ago and used sparingly. When she examined herself in the small mirror above her washstand, she saw flushed cheeks and bright eyes that betrayed her excitement. The knock on the door came precisely at 7. Thomas answered it, and Penelope heard the low rumble of male voices from where she stood in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Chen with the final supper preparations. "Daughter, come meet our guest," Thomas called. She smoothed her skirts and walked into the main room with what she hoped was appropriate dignity. Jackson stood just inside the doorway, hat in hand, looking slightly out of place in the comfortable, eclectic space. His eyes found her immediately, and his expression softened into something that made her stomach flip. "Mr. Fuller, this is Penelope Reynolds," Thomas said formally. "Penelope, this is Jackson Fuller, who wishes to make your acquaintance properly." "We have met already at the store," Penelope said, "but I am pleased to see you again, Mr. Fuller." "The pleasure is mine, Miss Reynolds," Jackson said. He turned to Thomas. "I appreciate your willingness to meet with me, sir. I know my arrival in town is sudden, and I respect your concern for Miss Reynolds's well-being." "Sit," Thomas said, gesturing to the table. "We will eat and we will talk." Supper was a meal of roasted chicken, vegetables from Mrs. Chen's garden, and rice prepared in the Chinese style that Penelope had grown to love. Jackson accepted the unfamiliar food without hesitation, using the chopsticks Mrs. Chen offered with surprising proficiency. "You have spent time in Chinese communities," Mrs. Chen observed. "Yes, madam," Jackson said. "I worked alongside Chinese miners in Nevada. Good men, hard workers. They taught me a lot, including how to eat properly." He smiled slightly. "Though I am sure my technique is still clumsy compared to yours." Thomas's expression thawed slightly at this show of respect. "Tell us about yourself, Mr. Fuller. Where are you from? What brings you to Murphy's?" Jackson set down his chopsticks, his expression growing more serious. "I was born in Texas, near Austin. My family had a small ranch, but my father died when I was 16 and we lost the land to debts. My mother moved back east to live with her sister, and I went west to find work. That was 8 years ago." "You have been wandering for 8 years?" Mrs. Chen asked. "More or less," Jackson admitted. "I worked cattle drives, mining camps, lumber operations. Anywhere that would pay an honest wage for honest work. I sent money back to my mother when I could, but mostly I just kept moving." "Why?" Penelope asked softly. "Why keep moving?" He met her eyes, and she saw something raw and honest in his gaze. "Because I was angry at my father for dying. At the world for being unfair. At myself for not being able to save the ranch. I thought if I kept moving I could outrun that anger. But you cannot outrun yourself, turns out." Thomas nodded slowly. "That is wisdom. What changed?" Jackson was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. I was in Virginia City, working a silver claim. There was a man there, a foreman, who treated the workers badly. Dangerous conditions, withheld pay, the usual corruption. The Chinese workers had it worst of all. I spoke up about it, tried to organize the men to demand better treatment. He paused. The foreman took exception to that. He and some of his friends made it clear I should leave town, and quickly. "So you ran," Thomas said, his tone neutral. "I left," Jackson corrected gently. "There is a difference. I could have stayed and fought, maybe gotten myself killed for pride, or I could have left and found somewhere better to make a stand. I chose the latter." "And Murphy's is where you plan to make this stand?" Mrs. Chen asked. Jackson's eyes drifted to Penelope again, lingering for a moment that made her pulse quicken. "I did not plan it, but when I rode into town yesterday, something felt different, like maybe I had been traveling toward this place all along without knowing it." Thomas and Mrs. Chen exchanged a glance, one of those wordless communications that came from years of marriage. Thomas picked up his chopsticks again, resuming his meal. "The Union Mine is hiring. I hear you spoke with Kowalski today." "Yes, sir," Jackson said. "He offered me a position starting tomorrow. Drilling work, $4 a day. It is good, honest pay." "It is dangerous work," Penelope said before she could stop herself. "My father died in a mine collapse." Jackson's expression filled with sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss. I will be careful, I promise you that." The rest of the meal passed in lighter conversation. Jackson asked about the town's history, listened attentively as Thomas and Mrs. Chen described the changes they had witnessed over the years. He was easy to talk to, Penelope discovered, asking thoughtful questions and seeming genuinely interested in the answers. When the meal was finished, Jackson helped clear the table despite Mrs. Chen's protests, carrying dishes to the kitchen with the ease of someone accustomed to doing his share of work. "Walk with me," he said quietly to Penelope as they stood at the kitchen window, the last of the dishes washed and dried. "Just around the block. I promise to be a gentleman." She glanced toward the main room, where Thomas and Mrs. Chen were pretending not to watch. Mrs. Chen gave a small nod. "Just around the block," Penelope agreed. "I should not be out long after dark." The evening air was cooler than the day had been, though still warm, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding hills and dust from the street. They walked in silence for a few moments, comfortable despite the newness of their acquaintance. "Thank you for tonight," Jackson said finally. "The Chens are good people. You are lucky to have them." "I know," Penelope said. "They have been my family since my mother died. I do not know what I would have done without them." "You would have survived," Jackson said with quiet confidence. "You are stronger than you think, I suspect." She glanced up at him, surprised. "What makes you say that? The way you carry yourself? The way you looked me in the eye yesterday when I first came into the store. You were cautious but not afraid. You assessed me, decided I was not a threat, and treated me with kindness. That takes strength." Warmth bloomed in her chest, or perhaps I am simply naive. "I do not think so." He paused, then asked, "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you not married? A woman like you, intelligent, kind, beautiful. I would think men would be lining up." Penelope laughed, though it came out more bitter than she intended. "Murphy's is a small town with few prospects. The men here either see me as a shopkeeper, or they want a wife to manage their household while they do as they please. Neither option appealed to me." "So you have been waiting," Jackson said softly. "I suppose I have, though I did not realize it until recently." She stopped walking, turning to face him in the gathering dusk. "Can I ask you something now? Anything? Why did you ask me to supper? You do not know me." "You could have your pick of available women, I imagine." Jackson smiled, and in the fading light, it transformed his serious features into something that stole her breath. "When I walked into that store yesterday, you were standing by the window, and the afternoon sun was turning your hair to copper and gold. You looked at me, and for the first time in 8 years, I felt like maybe I had found something worth staying for. Someone worth staying for." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "That is incredibly forward, Mr. Fuller." "I know," he said, "and I apologize if I have offended you, but I am 24 years old and I have spent 8 years running from ghosts and anger. I do not want to waste time anymore. If you want me to leave you alone, I will. But if there is any chance you might feel the same pull I do, I would like to explore where it might lead." Penelope stood frozen, torn between propriety and the fierce longing that had awakened in her chest. Everything she had been taught said she should be cautious, should demand a long courtship, should protect her reputation. But standing here with Jackson Fuller in the warm California evening, with his honest eyes and open heart, all those rules seemed like chains meant to keep her from living. "I feel it too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "Me too," he admitted, "but maybe that is how you know it is real." They walked back to the store slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. At the door, Jackson took her hand gently, raising it to his lips in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and intimate. "May I call on you again?" he asked. "I would like that," Penelope said. "Very much." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his figure disappearing down the street, and pressed her hand to her chest where her heart was still racing. Inside, Mrs. Chen was waiting with tea. "Well?" she asked. Penelope sank into a chair, feeling dazed and exhilarated and scared all at once. "I think I am in trouble." Mrs. Chen's smile was knowing. The best kind of trouble, perhaps. The next weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing connection. Jackson started work at the Union Mine, leaving before dawn and returning at dusk, covered in dust and exhaustion. But every evening he came to the store, sometimes just to buy a few supplies he did not really need, sometimes to walk Penelope home after closing, always proper, always respectful, but with an intensity of feeling that grew stronger with each passing day. They talked about everything. Jackson told her about Texas, about the ranch his family had lost, about his mother who now lived in Philadelphia, and wrote him letters he had trouble keeping up with while moving so often. Penelope told him about Boston, about her father's dreams of striking it rich, about her mother's homesickness for the East Coast, and how she had never quite adapted to life in California. "You miss it?" Jackson asked one evening as they sat on the bench outside the store, watching the sun set behind the Sierra Nevada. "Boston, I mean." "Sometimes," Penelope admitted. "I miss the culture, the theaters, the libraries, but this is my home now. My parents are buried here. The Chens are here. My life is here." "Your life could be anywhere," Jackson said quietly. "You are not trapped in Murphy's just because you have always been here." She looked at him, curious. "Are you suggesting I should leave?" "No," he said quickly. "I am suggesting that you stay because you choose to, not because you feel you have no other options. There is a difference." It was one of the things she loved about him, she was realizing. He challenged her to think differently, to see herself as someone with choices and agency rather than someone whose life simply happened to her. Love. The word had crept into her thoughts more and more frequently over the past weeks. Was this love? This constant awareness of him, the way her day felt incomplete until she saw him, the way his smile made her feel like she could do anything. It was so different from what she had imagined love would be, less like the dramatic passion of novels and more like coming home after a long journey. One Saturday evening in September, Jackson asked if she would like to go for a longer walk, perhaps up to the overlook above town where you could see the whole valley spread out below. Penelope agreed, telling the Chens she would be back before full dark. They climbed the winding path in companionable silence, their steps matched and easy. The evening was perfect, cool enough to be comfortable, with a breeze that carried the scent of pine and wild sage. At the top they stood side by side, looking out over Murphy's and the surrounding hills, painted gold and purple in the sunset. "I need to tell you something," Jackson said, his voice serious enough that Penelope's stomach clenched with sudden anxiety. "What is it?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I got a letter this week, from Virginia City. The foreman I had trouble with, he was arrested for fraud and assault. Several of the men I worked with wrote to tell me it was safe to come back if I wanted. They said the new management is looking for experienced workers, offering good wages." Penelope's world tilted. "You are leaving." "No," Jackson said firmly. "That is what I am trying to tell you. I am not leaving. I could go back to Virginia City, make more money than I am making here. Or I could go to San Francisco or a dozen other places, but I am staying in Murphy's." Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her knees weak. "Why?" He smiled, that warm, transforming smile that she had come to treasure. "Because this town has you. And you are worth more to me than all the silver in Nevada or all the gold in California. I love you, Penelope Reynolds. I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing in that store window, and I will love you for as long as you will let me." Tears pricked her eyes. "Jackson, you do not have to say it back," he said quickly. "I know it has only been a few weeks. I just needed you to know, needed you to understand why I am staying. Not because I am running from something anymore, but because I am running towards something, toward you. Toward the life we could build together." "You foolish, wonderful man," Penelope said, her voice breaking. "I love you too. I think I have since the moment you walked through that door. I was just too afraid to admit it." Jackson pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Penelope felt like she had finally found the place she was meant to be. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek, and his arms were solid and warm around her. "Marry me," he whispered into her hair. "I know it is too soon. I know I should wait, but I am 24 years old and tired of wasting time. Marry me, and I promise I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, seeing the vulnerability and hope in his dark eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Penelope felt like she was flying and falling and being caught all at once. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, and she responded in kind, all the longing and need of the past weeks pouring into that connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "We should go back before I forget myself completely and compromise your reputation beyond redemption." She laughed, giddy with joy and relief and the sheer rightness of this moment. "Yes, we should. Though I suspect our reputation is already thoroughly compromised by now. Mrs. Patterson has probably told half the county about us." They walked back down the hill hand in hand, making plans in breathless, excited voices. They would tell the Chens tonight. They would marry as soon as possible. No need for a long engagement. They would find a small house to rent, something modest that they could afford on Jackson's mining wages and Penelope's salary from the store. Eventually, perhaps, they could save enough to buy a piece of land, build something of their own. The Chens received the news with a mixture of happiness and concern. Mrs. Chen hugged Penelope tightly, whispering that she was glad but also worried about how fast this was all happening. Thomas shook Jackson's hand firmly and told him he was trusting him with something precious, and he had better live up to that trust. "I will," Jackson promised. "You have my word." The wedding was planned for early October, giving them 3 weeks to make arrangements. It would be a simple ceremony at the small church in town, with a reception at the restaurant afterward. Penelope had no family to invite, but the Chens would stand with her, and Jackson had sent word to his mother in Philadelphia, though he doubted she would be able to make the journey on such short notice. Those 3 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Penelope sewed a new dress for the wedding, pale ivory cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, working on it in the evenings by lamplight, while Mrs. Chen helped with the more intricate details. Jackson found a small house for rent at the edge of town, 2 rooms and a kitchen, with a view of the mountains from the front window. It was not much, but it was theirs. The night before the wedding, Penelope lay awake in her narrow bed for the last time, thinking about how much her life was about to change. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Jackson Fuller. She would share a home with a man, share a bed with him, build a life with him. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure, but when she pictured Jackson's face, his kind eyes and gentle smile, all the fear melted away. This was right. They were right. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the October sky brilliant blue overhead. Penelope dressed with Mrs. Chen's help, her hands shaking as she buttoned her new dress. The older woman fixed a small circlet of wildflowers in Penelope's hair, stepping back to admire the effect. "You are beautiful," Mrs. Chen said, tears shining in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud." "I wish she could be here," Penelope whispered. "She is here," Mrs. Chen said firmly, touching Penelope's chest over her heart. "She is always here." The church was full when they arrived, seemingly half the town having turned out for the occasion. Penelope saw familiar faces everywhere, Mrs. Patterson dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, the Henderson family in their Sunday best, even Mr. Kowalski from the mine, looking uncomfortable in a suit. And at the front of the church, standing beside the minister, was Jackson. He wore a new black suit, probably the finest clothes he had ever owned, and his hair was neatly combed. But it was his expression that made Penelope's breath catch. He looked at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked, like she was the sun breaking through clouds after a storm. Thomas Chen walked her down the aisle, standing in for the father she had lost. He placed her hand in Jackson's with a solemnity that spoke of love and trust, and the passing of responsibility from one man who cared for her to another. The ceremony was short and simple. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other, to face whatever came together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed her with a tenderness that made Penelope's heart swell to bursting. The reception at the restaurant was a joyful affair, full of good food and laughter and well wishes. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the street outside. Jackson proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, leading Penelope through reels and waltzes with easy confidence. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked, breathless and laughing. "My mother insisted on lessons when I was young," he admitted. "I complained about it then, but I am grateful now." As the evening wore on and the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Jackson leaned down to whisper in her ear. "Can we leave soon? I have been wanting to get you alone all day." Heat flooded through her, anticipation and nervousness mingling. "Yes," she whispered back. "Let us say our goodbyes." They slipped away while the party continued, walking hand in hand to their new home. Jackson carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the absurdity and romance of it, and set her down gently in the middle of their small main room. The house was modest but clean, furnished with cast-off pieces from various townspeople who had been generous in helping the young couple set up housekeeping. There was a table with 2 chairs, a sofa that had seen better days but was still comfortable, and in the bedroom, a sturdy iron bed with a new mattress that had been a wedding gift from the Chens. "Are you nervous?" Jackson asked, cupping her face gently in his hands. "A little," Penelope admitted, "but more than that, I am excited, happy, grateful to have found you." "I am the grateful one," he said, kissing her softly. "I still do not understand what I did to deserve you, but I promise I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered encouragement. It was awkward at times, both of them inexperienced and uncertain, but it was also beautiful and intimate and perfect in its imperfection. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, and Penelope felt a completeness she had never known before. "I love you," Jackson murmured against her hair. "My wife, my Penelope." "I love you too," she whispered back. "My husband, my Jackson." The early months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and negotiate the small compromises of daily life. Jackson worked long hours at the mine, coming home exhausted and covered in dust. Penelope continued working at the store, bringing home staples and goods at a discount that helped stretch their modest income. But every evening, no matter how tired they were, they made time for each other. They would sit together on their worn sofa, talking about their days, making plans for the future. Sometimes Jackson would read aloud from the newspapers Thomas Chen passed along, or Penelope would share stories about the customers who came through the store. It was domestic and ordinary and absolutely wonderful. Winter came early that year, October giving way to November with a sudden cold snap that had everyone scrambling for warmer clothes and extra firewood. The mine work became even more brutal in the cold, and Penelope worried about Jackson's safety constantly. Her worries proved justified one gray December afternoon when Mr. Kowalski came to the store, his expression grim. "There has been an accident," he said without preamble, "at the mine." "Jackson is hurt." Penelope's world stopped. "How badly?" A support beam collapsed. "He was caught in the debris. The doctor is with him now at the boarding house. I do not know more than that. I am sorry, Mrs. Fuller." She was moving before she consciously decided to, grabbing her cloak and running out the door, barely hearing Mrs. Chen calling after her. The boarding house was 5 blocks away, and she ran the entire distance, her skirts clutched in her fists, her heart pounding with terror. The doctor met her at the door, his expression serious but not hopeless. "He is stable," he said. "Broken ribs, a concussion, various cuts and bruises. He was very lucky. If he had been standing 6 inches to the left, the beam would have killed him." Relief and residual fear warred in her chest. "Can I see him?" "Yes, but he is sleeping now. The laudanum I gave him for the pain should keep him under for several hours." Jackson looked impossibly vulnerable lying in the narrow bed, his chest wrapped in bandages, bruises already darkening his face. Penelope sank into the chair beside him and took his hand, tears finally spilling over. "You cannot leave me," she whispered fiercely. "We have only just begun. You promised me a lifetime, Jackson Fuller, and I am holding you to that." His hand twitched in hers, but he did not wake. She sat with him through the night, refusing to leave despite the doctor's suggestions that she go home and rest. By morning, Jackson's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her face. "You are here," he rasped. "Of course I am here," she said, squeezing his hand. "Where else would I be?" "You should be sleeping. You look exhausted." She laughed wetly, tears and relief mingling. "You nearly die and you are worried about whether I got enough sleep. You are impossible." "But you love me anyway," he said, managing a weak smile. "I do," she confirmed. "So much it terrifies me." "Promise me you will be more careful." "I promise," he said. "I have too much to live for now to take foolish risks." Jackson's recovery took weeks. The doctor said he was not to return to the mine for at least a month, possibly longer if the ribs did not heal properly. The lack of income worried them both, but the Chens proved their generosity once again, giving Penelope extra hours and a small raise to help make ends meet. Other townspeople brought by food and firewood, the kind of practical help that made small communities survive. Penelope took on the role of nurse with determined efficiency, changing Jackson's bandages, making sure he ate properly, keeping him entertained during the long, boring days of forced inactivity. They played cards and read books borrowed from the church library and talked about everything and nothing. It was during those quiet weeks that Penelope realized something had changed with her body. Her monthly courses were late, and she felt queasy in the mornings. She said nothing at first, wanting to be certain before raising Jackson's hopes. But when a full 6 weeks passed with no sign of her courses, she knew. She told him on Christmas Eve, after they had returned from the small celebration at the church. Jackson was healing well, though still moving carefully, and they had spent the evening singing carols and drinking spiced cider with their neighbors. "I have a gift for you," she said as they prepared for bed. "But you have to promise not to get too excited and hurt your ribs." He looked at her curiously. "What kind of gift requires that warning? The kind that changes everything," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Next summer, if my calculations are correct." Jackson's expression went through a rapid series of changes. Confusion, realization, joy so pure and bright it brought tears to Penelope's eyes. "We are going to be parents," he breathed. "You are going to be a mother. I am going to be a father. Are you happy?" She asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, pulling her carefully into his arms. "I am overwhelmed, terrified, grateful. This is the best gift you could have given me." They held each other in the soft lamplight, both marveling at this new development, this new adventure they would face together. The winter passed into spring, and Jackson returned to work at the mine, though in a less dangerous position than before. The Union Mine had lost 2 men in the accident that injured Jackson, and the new safety protocols being implemented meant administrative work needed doing. Jackson proved adept at managing records and coordinating shifts, and the pay was nearly as good as the drilling work had been, with far less risk. Penelope's pregnancy progressed normally, though she was sick most mornings through March and April. Mrs. Chen provided ginger tea and crackers and endless patience, taking on more of the physical work at the store as Penelope's belly grew. By May, she was showing obviously, and there was no hiding her condition. The women of the town rallied around her with advice, and hand-me-down baby clothes and dire warnings about the trials of childbirth that kept her awake at night. Jackson was attentive to the point of being ridiculous, insisting she rest at every opportunity, carrying her upstairs even though she was perfectly capable of walking, treating her like she was made of spun glass. "I am pregnant, not dying," she finally said in exasperation one evening when he tried to prevent her from reaching for a book on a high shelf. "I know," he said, looking sheepish, "but you are carrying our child, our future. I just want to make sure nothing happens to either of you." Her irritation melted. She took his hand and placed it on her rounded belly where the baby was currently active. "Feel that. That is your son or daughter, strong and healthy and well protected. I am fine, Jackson. We are both fine." He marveled at the movement beneath his palm, his expression full of wonder. I still cannot quite believe this is real, that we made a person together. Well, you had better start believing it because this person is going to be here in about 2 months, and they are going to need parents who know what they are doing. Do any parents really know what they are doing? Jackson asked. Probably not, Penelope admitted. But we will figure it out together. The baby came on a hot July afternoon, 3 weeks earlier than expected but healthy and furious at being forced out into the bright, loud world. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Penelope thought she could not bear another contraction, could not push one more time. But Mrs. Chen was there and the midwife, and Jackson was allowed in during the final stages, holding her hand and whispering encouragement until finally, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling, red-faced infant on Penelope's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Penelope looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy and overwhelming love. He was perfect, from his shock of dark hair to his tiny, waving fists. Jackson knelt beside the bed, his own face wet with tears, reaching out with one finger to touch their son's impossibly small hand. "Hello," he whispered. "Hello, little one. Welcome to the world." They named him James, after Jackson's father, with the middle name Thomas in honor of the man who had become a father to Penelope. James Fuller made his presence known in the Fuller household immediately, demanding to be fed every few hours and making it clear he had strong opinions about everything. But even in the exhausting haze of new parenthood, with sleepless nights and constant worry and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping this tiny human alive, Penelope had never been happier. Watching Jackson with their son, seeing the gentle way he held the baby and the wonder in his eyes, she fell in love with him all over again. "You are a natural at this," she told him one evening as he walked James around the small main room, bouncing gently to soothe the fussy infant. "I am terrified every moment that I am going to do something wrong," Jackson admitted. "But I love him so much it hurts. I did not know it was possible to love someone you just met this intensely." "I know exactly what you mean," Penelope said. As summer turned to fall and James grew from a tiny newborn into a plump, alert infant, life settled into a new rhythm. Penelope reduced her hours at the store, working only a few days a week so she could focus on caring for James. Money was tight but not desperate, and they managed. One evening in October, nearly a year after their wedding, Jackson came home from the mine with news that made Penelope's heart leap with excitement and trepidation. "The mine is expanding operations," he said. "They are offering management positions to experienced workers. The pay would be significantly better than what I am making now. We could afford a larger house, start saving for the future." "That is wonderful," Penelope said. "Why do you look worried?" "Because the management position would mean more responsibility, longer hours. I would be home less, especially in the short term while I learn the role. I do not want to miss James growing up. I do not want to put all the burden of parenting on you." She considered this, balancing the practical benefits against the personal costs. "What do you want to do?" "I want to take it," Jackson admitted. "I want to provide for my family, give you and James security and opportunities, but not at the cost of being an absent father." "Then we will find a balance," Penelope said firmly. "You will take the position and we will adjust. I know you, Jackson Fuller. You will not let work consume you. You will make time for us because that is who you are." He pulled her into his arms, careful not to disturb James, who was sleeping in the basket beside them. "Have I told you lately that you are the wisest woman I know?" "Not today, no," she said, smiling against his chest. Jackson took the management position and thrived in it. He was good at organizing men and solving problems, and he had earned the respect of the miners through his own time working the claims. The additional income meant they could move to a larger house with 3 bedrooms and a proper kitchen, and they could afford to hire a woman to come in twice a week to help with the heavy cleaning and laundry. Life was good. Better than good. Penelope sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was really her life. A husband who loved her deeply, a healthy son, a comfortable home, good friends, and a place in the community. But there were challenges too. In 1880, when James was 2 and toddling everywhere with boundless energy, Penelope miscarried a second pregnancy at 3 months. She had not even told Jackson yet, wanting to wait until she was past the first trimester, and the loss hit her hard. She bled heavily for days, confined to bed on the doctor's orders, and fell into a depression that lasted weeks. Jackson was patient and supportive, taking on more of the household duties and caring for James when he was not at the mine. But she could see the worry in his eyes, the helplessness he felt at not being able to fix this for her. "I am sorry," she whispered one night when the darkness felt especially oppressive. "I know you want more children. I know I am failing you." "You are not failing me," Jackson said fiercely, pulling her close. "You are grieving, and that is completely understandable. We lost something precious, and we are allowed to mourn that. But you did not fail me, Penelope. You could never fail me. But what if I cannot have more children? What if James is the only one? Then James is the only one, and we will love him with everything we have. But I do not think that will be the case. The doctor said there is no reason you cannot have more children when you are ready. We just need to give you time to heal, both physically and emotionally." She clung to him, drawing strength from his certainty and love. Slowly, over the following months, the darkness lifted. She began to take joy in life again, in James's laughter and Jackson's presence, and the small pleasures of daily existence. A year later, she became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy held. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1882, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and made the lamplight flicker. She was smaller than James had been, but perfect, with Penelope's auburn hair and Jackson's dark eyes. They named her Margaret Rose after both their mothers, and called her Maggie from the start. James, now 4 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding times. "Gentle," Penelope reminded him constantly as he stroked Maggie's soft hair with careful fingers. "She is very small and delicate." "I will protect her," James declared with all the seriousness of a 4-year-old. "No one will hurt my sister." Jackson caught Penelope's eye over James's head, and they shared a smile full of love and pride and gratitude for the life they had built together. The years passed with surprising speed. James started school, proving to be a bright student with a particular aptitude for mathematics. Maggie grew into a cheerful, curious child who followed her brother everywhere, and drove him to distraction with her constant questions. Jackson rose to become the assistant manager of the Union Mine, overseeing operations and safety protocols with the dedication of someone who had personally experienced the cost of negligence. Penelope eventually stopped working at the store altogether, her time consumed with managing the household and raising the children. She missed the daily interaction with customers and the independence her salary had represented, but she did not regret the choice. These years with her children were precious and fleeting, and she wanted to be present for all of it. In 1885, Thomas Chen died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving Mrs. Chen devastated. She had lost her partner of more than 30 years, her companion and friend and the other half of her heart. Penelope spent hours with her in the weeks following the funeral, sitting in companionable silence or listening as Mrs. Chen shared stories about the early days of their marriage, the struggles and joys they had faced together. "I do not know how to be just me, Mrs. Chen confessed one afternoon, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I have been we for so long." "You will always be we," Penelope said gently, taking her hand. "He is still part of you. Love does not end with death." Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand. "You are wise beyond your years, daughter of my heart. Thomas and I were blessed to have you in our lives." "I was the one who was blessed," Penelope said. "You saved me after my mother died. You gave me family and purpose and love. I can never repay that." "You repay it by living well, Mrs. Chen said. "By loving your husband and children, by being happy. That is all Thomas and I ever wanted for you." Mrs. Chen continued running the store with help from a young Chinese man named Wei who had recently arrived in Murphy's, but she was slower now, more fragile. Penelope made sure to visit several times a week, bringing the children and news from around town, determined that this woman who had been a mother to her would not face old age alone. The children grew. James developed a passion for engineering, spending hours with Jackson at the mine when he was allowed, studying the equipment and asking endless questions about how things worked. Maggie proved to be artistic, drawing pictures of everything she saw and begging for paper and pencils for every birthday and Christmas. In 1888, when James was 10 and Maggie 6, Penelope found herself pregnant again, a surprise that left both her and Jackson stunned. They had assumed their family was complete, had given away the baby clothes and cradle. But here was this new life, unexpected and already beloved. Their second son was born in December, a tiny baby who came into the world during the first snow of winter. They named him Thomas Charles, honoring both Thomas Chen and Penelope's father Charles. Tommy, as he was quickly dubbed, was a content baby who seemed happy to observe the chaos of the Fuller household with wise, solemn eyes. Life was full and busy and occasionally overwhelming. Jackson was now the mine manager, having taken over when the previous manager retired, and the responsibility weighed heavily on him. He took the safety of his workers personally, implementing strict protocols and fighting with the mine owners for better equipment and working conditions. It meant long hours and constant stress, but he refused to cut corners, no matter the pressure. Penelope managed the household with the efficiency of a general commanding troops, keeping track of school schedules and meal times, and the thousand small details that kept a family of 5 functioning. There were moments of frustration and exhaustion, times when she locked herself in the bedroom for 10 minutes just to have silence and solitude. But there were far more moments of joy. James winning the school mathematics competition, Maggie's pride when her drawing was displayed at the town hall, Tommy's first steps, Jackson coming home and pulling her into his arms despite the children demanding his attention. One evening in the spring of 1890, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Jackson found Penelope sitting on the porch of their home, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the sunset. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her and taking her hand. "About how far we have come," she said. "Do you remember that first night when we walked around the block after supper at the Chens?" "I remember everything about that night," Jackson said. "I remember being terrified you would reject me. I remember thinking I had never met anyone like you. I remember thinking you were going to break my heart," Penelope admitted. "That you would move on and I would be left behind, missing someone I barely knew." "I almost did move on," Jackson said quietly. "When I got that letter from Virginia City, there was a moment when I seriously considered going back. The money was better, the opportunities were greater. But then I thought about you, about this town, about the life I could build here if I just had the courage to stay." Penelope turned to look at him, seeing the silver starting to thread through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun and smiling at his children. He was 40 years old now and she was 36, and they had been married for more than 10 years. A lifetime and yet no time at all. "I am glad you stayed," she said softly. "Someone asked me once why I stayed," Jackson said. "It was actually old Bill Anderson at the mine, maybe 5 years ago. He could not understand why I had not moved on to bigger opportunities. I told him it was because this town has you, has us, has everything that matters." "That is a good answer," Penelope said, her throat tight with emotion. "It is the only answer," Jackson said. "You are my home, Penelope Fuller. You and our children. Murphy's is just a town, but you make it everything." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, tasting the coffee he had drunk after supper and the peppermint he had stolen from Maggie's candy jar. When they broke apart, she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he said. "Always." The years continued their steady march. James graduated from school at 16 and shocked everyone by announcing he wanted to attend the University of California in Berkeley to study engineering. Jackson and Penelope had not anticipated the expense, but they were determined their son would have opportunities they had not. Jackson took on consulting work for other mines in the area, and Penelope sold preserves and baked goods, and somehow they scraped together enough to send James off to university in the fall of 1894. Maggie, now 12, cried for days after her brother left, missing his presence in the house. Tommy, at 6, mostly seemed pleased to have James's bed to himself, though he asked frequently when his brother would come home. James returned for holidays and summers, full of exciting ideas about engineering and mining safety, and new techniques being developed. He had grown from a boy into a young man, taller than Jackson now, with the confidence that came from succeeding in a larger world. But he still looked at his parents with love and respect, and he still made time to play with Tommy and admire Maggie's latest drawings. In 1896, Maggie announced she wanted to be an art teacher. She was 14 and had been helping Mrs. Henderson teach the younger children at school, discovering she loved sharing her passion for art with others. Penelope and Jackson encouraged her, though they worried about the limited opportunities for women even in California. "The world is changing," Maggie said with youthful optimism. "By the time I am old enough to teach, there will be more opportunities. You will see." "I hope you are right," Penelope said, hugging her daughter close. That same year, Mrs. Chen fell ill with influenza. At 78, she was frail and vulnerable, and the illness hit her hard. Penelope spent days at her bedside, spooning broth into her mouth and wiping her fever-hot face with cool cloths, terrified of losing this woman who had been her anchor for so many years. Mrs. Chen survived, but she was never quite the same afterward. Her health remained fragile, and she finally agreed to sell the store to Y, who had proven himself capable and trustworthy over the years. She moved into a small room behind the store, insisting she did not need more space and did not want to be a burden to anyone. "You could never be a burden," Penelope told her firmly. "You could come live with us. We have room now that James is away at school." "That is kind, but no," Mrs. Chen said. "I am comfortable here. Y will look after me, and you will visit often, yes. Every day," Penelope promised. Tommy started school that fall, the last of their children to reach that milestone. Penelope walked him to the schoolhouse on his first day, holding his small hand in hers, remembering doing the same thing with James and then Maggie. Time moved so quickly, each phase of motherhood ending before she felt ready to let it go. Jackson found her crying in the kitchen when she returned home, and he pulled her into his arms without a word, understanding without needing explanation. "They grow up," she said against his chest. "Why do they have to grow up?" "Because that is what we raise them to do," Jackson said gently. "We give them roots and wings, and then we have to let them fly." "I am not ready for that," she admitted. "Neither am I," he said. "But we will manage it together, just like we have managed everything else." In 1898, James graduated from Berkeley with honors and immediately received job offers from mining companies across the West. To everyone's surprise, he chose to return to Murphy's, accepting a position with the Union Mine as a safety engineer. "Why?" Jackson asked, though his voice was full of pride and gratitude. "You could make more money in San Francisco or Nevada." James smiled, and in that moment he looked so much like his father that Penelope's heart ached. "Because this town has you, has all of you, and because there is work to be done here, making mining safer for everyone. I learned that from you, Dad, that doing right is more important than doing well." Jackson had to turn away to hide his emotion, but Penelope saw the way his shoulders shook, and she knew he was crying. She took his hand and squeezed it tightly, sharing his pride and joy. James moved into his own small house at the edge of town, establishing his independence while remaining close to family. He threw himself into his work with the same dedication his father had always shown, identifying hazards and implementing solutions, earning the respect of the miners and the grudging approval of the mine owners. At 20 years old, he was already making a difference. And a year later, he met a young woman named Sarah Mitchell, who had recently moved to Murphy's with her widowed mother. And the look in his eyes when he talked about her reminded Penelope powerfully of Jackson all those years ago, walking into the general store and changing her life forever. Maggie graduated from school in 1900 and announced her intention to attend the normal school in San Jose to become a certified teacher. At 18, she was confident and determined, and Penelope recognized that same quality in her daughter that had driven her own mother to cross a continent in pursuit of opportunity. "I am proud of you," Penelope told her the night before she left for San Jose. "Your grandmother would be proud too." "Do you think I am doing the right thing?" Maggie asked, a rare moment of vulnerability showing through her confidence. "I think you are doing what feels right for you," Penelope said. "And that is always the right thing." Tommy, at 12, was the one struggling with his siblings' departures. He had grown up with James and Maggie as constant presences, and now suddenly he was essentially an only child, the house quiet in ways it had never been before. "It is just us now," he said to Penelope one evening, sounding lost. "Just us and your father and all the people who love you," Penelope corrected gently. "James is just across town. Maggie will come home for holidays. Nothing essential has changed." But of course, everything had changed. The Fuller children were launching into their own lives, and Penelope and Jackson were entering a new phase of their marriage, one focused more on each other than on the daily demands of active parenting. It was strange and a little frightening, and also surprisingly wonderful. They had time for long conversations again, for walks without needing to coordinate schedules, for focusing on their relationship in ways they had not been able to since James was born. "I feel like I am getting to know you all over again," Jackson said one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Is that good or bad?" Penelope asked. "Good," he said firmly. "Very good. I fell in love with a 22-year-old woman with her whole life ahead of her. Now I get to fall in love with a 42-year-old woman who has lived a full, rich life. You are even more remarkable now than you were then. You are just saying that because you want me to make your favorite pie, Penelope teased. I am saying it because it is true, Jackson said, taking her hand. Though I would not say no to that pie. In 1901, James married Sarah Mitchell in a wedding that was much larger and more elaborate than Jackson and Penelope's had been. Sarah was a lovely young woman with a practical nature and a sharp mind, and she fit into the Fuller family as if she had always been there. When she became pregnant a few months after the wedding, Penelope found herself preparing to become a grandmother at 43. The prospect was both thrilling and surreal. She remembered holding newborn James, marveling at his tiny perfection, and now he was going to be a father himself. Time was a strange and relentless thing. James and Sarah's daughter was born in the spring of 1902, a beautiful baby girl they named Lily. Penelope held her granddaughter for the first time and felt something shift in her heart, a new dimension of love opening up. This was her legacy, this tiny person who carried her blood and her family forward into the future. You are going to spoil her, Jackson said, watching Penelope coo over the baby. Absolutely, Penelope agreed without shame. That is what grandparents are for, Mrs. Chen died peacefully in her sleep that fall, at the age of 84. The entire town turned out for her funeral, Chinese and white residents alike coming to pay their respects to a woman who had served the community with grace and dignity for nearly 50 years. Penelope spoke at the service, her voice breaking as she talked about the woman who had been her second mother, her mentor, her friend. She taught me that family is not just blood, Penelope said. It is the people who choose to love you, who stand beside you through hardship and joy. She chose me when I had no one else, and I will carry her love with me for the rest of my days. Jackson stood beside her, his hand steady on the small of her back, and Tommy sat in the front row, trying to be brave. James and Sarah were there with baby Lily, and Maggie had come home from San Jose for the funeral. The Fullers stood together, a family built on love and loss and determination, and Penelope felt Mrs. Chen's presence like a blessing. Life continued, because life always does. Maggie graduated from normal school and took a teaching position in San Jose, returning to Murphy's only for holidays. James and Sarah had a son they named Jackson Charles, and Penelope watched her husband hold his namesake grandson with tears streaming down his face. Tommy grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's sense of justice and his mother's stubborn determination, eventually deciding he wanted to study law. A lawyer, Jackson said when Tommy announced his plans at dinner one evening. Where did that come from? From watching you fight for the miners all these years, Tommy said. From seeing that the law can be a tool for good if it is used right. I want to help people who cannot help themselves. Then you will be a fine lawyer, Jackson said, his voice thick with pride. In 1908, Penelope turned 50 and Jackson 54. They had been married for 28 years, had raised 3 children, survived illness and loss and the daily challenges of building a life together. Jackson's hair was completely silver now, and Penelope's auburn had faded to a softer red-brown threaded with gray. They both moved a little more slowly, felt the cold a little more keenly, but their love had only deepened with time. One evening that summer, they took a walk up to the overlook where Jackson had proposed all those years ago. It was harder going now than it had been then, and they had to stop twice to catch their breath, but the view was just as spectacular. You remember? Jackson asked, pulling her close. Every detail, Penelope said. You told me you loved me, you asked me to marry you. I thought my heart was going to beat right out of my chest. Mine too, Jackson admitted. I was terrified you would say no. There was never any chance of that, Penelope said. From the moment you walked into that store, you were it for me. You were everything I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting." They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the Sierra Nevada, the same mountains that had witnessed their first meeting, their wedding, the birth of their children, all the thousands of ordinary and extraordinary moments that made up a marriage. "If you could go back," Jackson said quietly, "knowing everything that would happen, all the struggles and sorrows as well as the joys, would you do it again?" "In a heartbeat," Penelope said without hesitation. "Every moment, every choice, every hardship, all of it led to this, to us. I would do it all again for the privilege of loving you." "Good," Jackson said, "because so would I." The years that followed brought more changes. Tommy went off to law school in San Francisco. James became the manager of the Union Mine when Jackson finally retired in 1910. Maggie married a fellow teacher named Robert Chen, Y's son. And Penelope saw the beautiful symmetry in that connection, her daughter joining the family that had meant so much to her. Jackson's retirement was an adjustment for both of them. He had worked since he was 16 years old, and suddenly having nothing but time felt strange and purposeless. Penelope encouraged him to take up hobbies, to travel, to enjoy the fruits of nearly 40 years of hard labor. They took a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation in decades. They visited Tommy at law school, saw Maggie and Robert in their small apartment, walked along the beach and ate in restaurants, and felt young and free in a way they had not since before children. It was magical and exhausting in equal measure, and they were both relieved to return to Murphy's and the familiar comfort of home. But they had learned something important. They still enjoyed each other's company, still found pleasure in new experiences, still had adventures left to share. They began taking regular walks around town, visiting with old friends, spending time with James and Sarah and the grandchildren. Jackson helped James with mine safety issues, offering the benefit of his experience without overstepping. Penelope worked on a quilt made from scraps of fabric from all the important moments in their lives. Her wedding dress, clothes the children had worn, James's baby blanket. It was a map of their history, stitched together with love and memory. In 1914, war broke out in Europe, and everyone held their breath, hoping America would stay out of it. Tommy, now a practicing lawyer in San Francisco, wrote worried letters about the political situation. James and Sarah's son, Jackson Charles, now 12, talked about wanting to be a soldier if war came, making Sarah pale with fear. But the war stayed far away, and life in Murphy's continued its peaceful rhythm. More grandchildren arrived. James and Sarah had another daughter. Maggie and Robert had twin boys. Penelope found herself at the center of a growing web of family, organizing holiday dinners and birthday celebrations, watching her legacy multiply and flourish. On their 30th wedding anniversary in October 1908, Jackson surprised Penelope with a trip back to the Overlook where he had proposed. He was 60 now and moved more stiffly, but he insisted on making the climb, refusing to let age rob them of this moment. At the top, as the sun set in familiar glory, he took her hand and said, 30 years. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like no time at all." "I know exactly what you mean," Penelope said. "I wanted to bring you here to tell you something," Jackson said. "To promise you something." "What is that?" "That I am still here because this town has you, because wherever you are is where I want to be. That has not changed in 30 years, and it will not change for however many years we have left." Penelope felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You do not have to promise me that. I already know." "Maybe I need to say it anyway," Jackson said. "Need to remind us both that what we built to last." She kissed him then, softly and sweetly, tasting salt from her tears and feeling the familiar warmth of his lips. They were 56 and 60 years old, and they had earned every line on their faces, every gray hair, every ache and pain. But they had earned this too, this enduring love, this partnership that had weathered everything life threw at them. The years that followed brought the inevitable losses that come with age. Jackson's mother died in Philadelphia at 84, and though they had not been close in years, he grieved the final severing of that connection. Friends from Murphy's passed away, and each funeral was a reminder of their own mortality. But there were joys, too. Tommy married a woman named Alina who had been fighting for women's suffrage, and Penelope loved her fierce daughter-in-law immediately. When women finally won the right to vote in California in 1911, Penelope cast her ballot for the first time at 53, feeling a thrill of pride and power. More grandchildren arrived, a whole generation of Fullers and Chens who ran through Murphy's with the same energy James and Maggie and Tommy had shown decades before. The house that had been so quiet when the children left was now regularly full of noise and chaos and laughter again, and Penelope loved every exhausting moment of it. In 1917, when America finally entered the war, Jackson Charles enlisted at 19, breaking his mother's heart but making his grandfather quietly proud. He survived the war and came home in 1919, changed and quiet, but alive. Tommy's legal work focused on helping returning veterans, and Maggie taught a generation of children who would build the post-war world. Jackson and Penelope watched all of this from their comfortable home in Murphy's, marveling at how much the world had changed since they were young. They had seen the end of the Old West, the coming of automobiles and telephones and electric lights. Murphy's was no longer the rough mining town it had been in 1878. It was a proper small town with paved streets and modern conveniences. But some things had not changed. The mountains still rose in the distance. The sun still set in spectacular colors. And Jackson and Penelope still sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing, grateful for another day together. On Jackson's 70th birthday in 1924, the family gathered for a celebration. All 3 children were there with their spouses and children, 11 grandchildren in total, ranging in age from 3 to 23. The house was full to bursting with food and laughter and love. "Look at what we made," Jackson said to Penelope as they watched the chaos from their chairs in the corner. "Not just the children, but all of this family, this life." "We did good," Penelope agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "I love you," Jackson said, as he had said thousands of times over 46 years of marriage. But somehow it still made her heart flutter the way it had that first time. "I love you too," she said. "Always." In 1926, Penelope fell ill with pneumonia. At 68, she was frailer than she wanted to admit, and the illness hit her hard. Jackson nursed her with the same dedicated attention she had given him after his mining accident all those decades ago, sitting by her bed and reading to her, spooning broth into her mouth, refusing to leave her side. "You cannot leave me," he whispered one night when she was at her worst, echoing the words she had said to him so long ago. "We have more time left. I am not ready to say goodbye." She recovered slowly, taking weeks to regain her strength. The doctor said she would need to be careful, that her lungs were permanently weakened. But she was alive, and she was determined to make the most of however much time she had left. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in October 1928 with another family gathering, even larger than Jackson's birthday had been. There were great-grandchildren now, babies and toddlers who represented a future Penelope, would likely never see but loved fiercely anyway. 50 years, she said to Jackson as they cut the cake the grandchildren had baked. Who would have thought? I would have, Jackson said. From the moment I met you, I knew you were forever. They danced that night slowly and carefully, Jackson supporting her when her legs grew tired. The grandchildren watched with something like awe, seeing in their grandparents a love that had endured half a century and showed no signs of fading. The final years were gentle ones. Jackson's health declined slowly but steadily, his heart weakening, his movements becoming more labored. Penelope's lungs never fully recovered from the pneumonia, and she tired easily. But they had each other, and they had family, and they had memories of a life well lived. On a warm evening in June 1930, they sat on their porch as the sun set behind the mountains. Jackson was 76 and Penelope 72, and they had been married for 51 years and 8 months. You remember when I asked you why I stayed, Jackson said suddenly. When did you ask me that? Penelope was confused. I did not ask you. Someone else asked me years ago. I told them it was because this town has you. Oh, Penelope said softly, that is a lovely reason. It is the only reason that ever mattered, Jackson said. Everything else, all the gold and silver in California, all the opportunities and adventures I might have had elsewhere, none of it would have been worth having without you. Jackson Fuller, are you getting sentimental in your old age? Penelope teased gently. I suppose I am, he admitted. But after more than 50 years together, I think I have earned the right. She took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that remained despite age and illness. I am glad you stayed. I am glad you walked into that store in August 1878 and changed my life forever. I am glad too, Jackson said. It was the best decision I ever made. They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had built a life together from nothing but love and determination and hope. They had raised children, weathered storms, celebrated joys, and mourned losses. They had worked and laughed and fought and made love and made a family that would carry their legacy forward long after they were gone. And through it all, through every moment of those 50-plus years, they had chosen each other. Every day, in 1,000 small ways, they had chosen to stay, to love, to build something that would last. Jackson died peacefully in his sleep in August 1930, 1 month after that final conversation on the porch. Penelope woke to find him still and cold beside her, and though her heart broke, there was also a strange peace in knowing he had suffered no pain, had simply slipped away in the night. The funeral was enormous, half the county turning out to pay their respects to a man who had spent more than 50 years making the mines safer, fighting for workers' rights, and living with integrity and honor. His children spoke, his grandchildren sang, and Penelope sat in the front row, dry-eyed and dignified, already feeling his absence like a missing limb. She lived another 3 years without him, stubbornly refusing to follow, determined to see her great-grandchildren grow a little more, to hold on to this life she had built even though the best part of it was gone. James and Sarah moved her into their home, where she held court from her comfortable chair by the window, telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. She told them about the day Jackson rode into Murphy's, how she had known from that first glimpse that her life was about to change. She told them about their wedding, about the births of their children, about the accidents and illnesses and hard times they had survived. She told them about sitting on the porch and watching sunsets, about ordinary conversations that had somehow contained entire worlds of meaning. Your grandfather, she said to Jackson Charles one afternoon when he visited with his young children, was the best man I ever knew, and I knew him better than anyone. Tell us how he proposed, Jackson Charles's daughter begged. She had heard the story dozens of times but never tired of it. So Penelope told it again, about the overlook and the sunset and Jackson's declaration that he was staying because this town had her. About how terrifying and exhilarating it had been to say yes to someone she barely knew. About how right that decision had proven to be. "That is so romantic," the girl sighed. It was, Penelope agreed. But it was also real. Romance is not just grand gestures and dramatic declarations. It is choosing someone every day, even when it is hard. It is building a life together brick by brick, moment by moment. That is what your grandfather and I did. We built something that lasted. She died in her sleep on a cold night in November 1933, 75 years old and ready to rest. Her children found her the next morning, peaceful and still, and they knew she had finally gone to join Jackson. They buried her beside him in the Murphys' cemetery, under a large oak tree with a view of the mountains she had loved. The headstone read, Penelope Reynolds Fuller, 1856-1933, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. And beside it, Jackson Thomas Fuller, 1854-1930, beloved husband, father, grandfather. But those simple words could not begin to capture what they had been to each other, what they had built together. The true monument to their love was not carved in stone, but lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the family that carried their blood and their values forward into the future. Years later, when the town of Murphys celebrated its centennial, someone asked James Fuller why his father had chosen to settle in this particular place all those decades ago. James was an old man himself by then, his own children and grandchildren around him, but he remembered the story his mother had told so many times. "A man once asked my father why he stayed in Murphys," James said. "My father told him it was because this town had my mother. That she was worth more than any opportunity elsewhere, that she was his home." The crowd murmured appreciatively at the romantic story, but James was not finished. "But what that really meant," he continued, "was that my father understood something important. That home is not a place. It is the people you love. My parents built a home together here in Murphys, and they filled it with love and family and purpose. That is their legacy. Not the houses they lived in or the jobs they worked, but the love they shared and passed down to us." The crowd fell silent, moved by the simple truth of it. And somewhere, perhaps, two spirits stood together watching the mountains they had loved, holding hands as they had for more than 50 years, grateful for the journey they had shared, because in the end that is what mattered. Not where they had come from or what they had accomplished, but that they had found each other in a dusty California mining town in 1878 and chosen to build something beautiful together. That Jackson had stayed because the town had Penelope, and Penelope had flourished because she had Jackson. They had lived and loved and left behind a legacy that would echo through generations. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.